right, guys, welcome back to the 706 podcast, the podcast where we rate, review, and compare feature films to debate their merits and potential inclusion in our growing canon of the 706 greatest films of all time. I'm not sure how many are in there right now, but we're probably like halfway there, honestly. Like, we're probably most of the way there. There's probably only a few more slots. But I think one of the best films we could potentially include is Harmony Korine's 2013 film, Spring Breakers. I think it was 2013 and or 2012. And I'm joined here by my three co-hosts today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Why don't we have Anthony introduce himself?
Anthony.
Kirk.
Hello, folks.
And then Connor.
And I'm Connor.
So Spring Breakers is sort of I don't know how you would describe it. I don't know what genre it is. I don't know what it is, but it's a movie by Harmony Korine, who's famous for kind of experimental, avant-garde-ish kind of stuff. He did Gummo. He wrote the screenplay for Kids. Which are these very grimy, kind of uncomfortable, like tiny movies for like no money. This was his step into the mainstream where he got more money to work with and he got some bigger actors. He's got like the Disney stars in it. He's got Selena Gomez and Vanessa Hudgens, and he's kind of trying to make things a little bit more sleek, a little bit more polished, while still maintaining his kind of Harmony Korine aesthetic. And it's a really wacky and wild movie, and got a lot of thoughts on it. But it's a movie that's always kind of stuck in my head. It's a movie that's I've always kind of had an affection for, even an affection that I often have a hard time really articulating or nailing down why I like this movie so much, but I'm going to try today. So before I get into that, why don't we start with Anthony? Anthony, what did you think of this go around on Spring Breakers?
Let's see. I haven't seen this movie, coincidentally, since my first college spring break in 2013. And it was nothing like the film. I'll tell you that now. And it was also an interesting moment because I remember thinking the movie at the time was actually really boring. Like, I did not get into it at the time. I thought it was kind of unexciting, and nothing about it really stuck with me outside of kind of the ending shot and a few other moments like that. I was so surprised at the time. I remember that Selena Gomez left like 30 minutes into the film or whatever it is. And she, despite being kind of the big promotional center, she was, I think at the time, probably more than any of the other ones, the official like teen to adult actress, adult like persona kind of breakout like, you know, role. Like Vanessa Hudgens had kind of some of that notoriety from like the like leak. She was actually one of the first major like stars I remember, besides Paris Hilton with like and Kim Kardashian with that kind of like coverage. Kirk's gonna say something.
Okay, Anthony, you're clearly showing your age. High School Musical was a nationwide phenomenon. She was clearly famous. She was in the cultural milieu. She was more famous than Selena Gomez. But anyways, continue.
Already, very contentious episode. I can just tell that I go on.
No, I think that's true, but I think at the time, at least the way it was marketed towards like me and my demographic,
it had the squeaky clean image right up until Spring Break.
Yes.
Vanessa Hudgens had a little bit of a
couple years out. Yeah, Selena Gomez was still a year or two off of like Wizards of Waverly Place. But anyway, my point being is like I haven't seen the film since, and I didn't have exactly the positive impression the first time. This time though, coming around to it, I was actually again kind of underwhelmed, and I kind of was thinking that like I was a little disappointed in kind of the film. I thought it could have done a number of things differently. I thought it like kind of shockingness kind of disappeared this time. I will say I think James Franco delivers a very interesting performance. On one hand, I think it's really good. On the other hand, it does sometimes fall into Joe Dirt territory. And I don't think that's the fault of him. I think it's the fault of the way the film sets it up, in which it wants to embrace this sort of Andy Warhol stylization about the kind of banality of kind of seeing hedonism. I think more importantly, what's interesting for me, though, about this movie is something that we've talked about before. I don't remember if we talked about it on the podcast, but that is to think about the kind of moment it came out in and to think about the moment that allowed it to be made. Because it's one of those movies, I think, like Tropic Thunder, as Tony always says, that would not be made, I think, nowadays, at least not in this way. and definitely not by Harmony Korine probably, and definitely not with that kind of like studio backing kind of major touchdown. It would probably arrive with much more controversy, much more shaking of the heads, I think, anyway. And so there's all that going for it. You know, this is 2013. So it's the kind of height of James Franco mania to some extent. It's the height, or it's the middle of, you know, Obama's second term and kind of an interesting moment in our history. It's also the kind of moment where Justin Bieber is moving to kind of his like rap persona very briefly, if I remember right. So like all that's kind of in the air, but none of that's on the movie. I think that's more kind of my interest, you know, in thinking about it. But I'll stop there, and, you know, I don't want to go on too much.
Okay, interesting response. Very, very cagey. Very kind of felt like you kept your cards close to the chest there, Anthony. But let's go, Connor. I want to hear Connor's opinion.
Sure. So this is my second time watching. You know, first time I watched it, I was definitely swept away by the images, and though, you know, I think I could think back and think of some, you know, sort of aesthetic or, you know, sort of stylistic precedence to this movie. It felt very new, very fresh to me, with its aesthetic, the neon style, the kind of neon mixed with grime and all that. Right now, maybe it feels a little bit more played out, this aesthetic. Now, I think, again, watching again, right, I was, the first time I was swept away by the images, you know, completely. I was just along for the ride. So I was kind of willing to just go along with it. And I found the story a little bit underwhelming even the first time I watched it. And now watching it again, you know, I have to say, it feels as if just there's no there. It really is. It feels like a music video. It feels like something that, you know, has a lot of really interesting images, you know, and just pitch perfect photography, for example, lots of interesting ideas, but it really does not cohere. There's a lot of inconsistency. There's a lot of kind of just confusion of ideas all at once. And I think, you know, it didn't help Korine that he really eschewed so many conventions of film, but then held on to others, right? I think it would be hard to make a feature film. You know, I think he was forced to, in some ways, to have a kind of a story to the movie, which ultimately never materializes because it's kind of half-baked. But I think he reaches in the direction of a story with characters and character motivations and reversals and all these things. But it just doesn't really come together, and it feels very confused. And I think I got the impression that, you know, Anthony described for his first go-around, which was, you know, yeah, just a kind of a boredom, or a kind of like, well, I get it. Yeah, how many times can James Franco do like a little rhyme about the four little chickies came to the, you know, like there's something just so corny and off about it. You know, it's just like, I get what he's kind of going for, but like, this is not cool the second time he does it. And there's also just kind of like, okay, the movie feels dated in some ways, and I really do want to get into all of this kind of cultural speculation or cultural analysis based on the time at which it came out. I'm not sure I have fully formed ideas, but I'd love to discuss it. But I mean, even at the time, this movie felt a little bit dated, you know, because it had this whole kind of like, okay, just the party culture of, you know, of spring break culture, which already was kind of a thing of maybe earlier in the 2000s. And then also this kind of off-putting kind of gangsta stuff, or the kind of white gangsta kind of concept, you know, that I'm saying gangsta in kind of in quotation marks. I mean, I think it has that kind of lameness and kind of late to the party kind of attitude, or kind of appreciation or perspective on, you know, kind of like rap and hip hop culture or drugs, or, you know, like these kinds of things. I mean, it feels kind of like blinkered and sort of clumsy in its treatment of these topics, these cultural signifiers and products, you know. But anyway, so yeah, I guess I was mostly kind of negative on it, but I'm curious to hear, and, you know, I felt it was confused, but I'm curious to hear what Tony has to say. Of course, maybe there's something I'm definitely missing, but.
Okay. And Kirk, why don't you close us out, Kirk?
Well, I'm glad you're curious to hear what I have to say, Connor. Thanks a lot, buddy. No, this movie is an utter, I don't even know what to say. You guys are so wrong, because this movie's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
So, fuck you, Anthony. Fuck you, Connor. This movie's awesome. And I'll explain why. I have reasons, okay? I have reasons. First off, let me Exhibit A. Okay. For the audience, where did you three esteemed gentlemen go to college?
NYU.
NYU. Not exactly bumfuck middle of nowhere, is it? Guess where I went for the first 2 years of college? St. Olaf College, Northfield, Minnesota. Cornfields, barren wasteland, rampant alcoholism, latent hypertension. This is what we did, okay? It was about, once the weekend came, it was about the hedonistic urges taking over, kind of allowing for this catharsis from the banality of life. And it was about, let's get drunk to the point of blacking out. Let's do some other drugs to be unnamed at this time, and let's try to have some sex, right? That's what it was about. You guys, Friday night comes, hey, Anthony, have you seen the new exhibit at the Whitney? Maybe we should go in the morning. You guys don't get it? You guys don't get it? This is what it's about. And so for me, this movie scintillated the senses, and it caused my mirror neurons to fire like none other. It was an absolute joyride, and I totally dug it. I got it from the beginning. Like, I realize it's fraught with problems, like it really is. But let me just say this. If, in the past, I've been critical. I can think of one very specific instance, Blue Valentine, where I was kind of critical of the idea of foregoing or waving off plot inconsistencies in favor of...
Talking about Blue Velvet?
Blue Velvet. Is it Blue Velvet?
It's
I said Blue
movie.
Valentine.
Just making sure for the
Yeah.
audience.
My mistake. I was in favor at that point of waving off plot inconsistencies in favor of accepting this notion of a dream-like interpretation. I wasn't in favor, I should say. And I find myself in a role reversal here, because I think this movie has no other way to be interpreted than that through like a fever dream of a 35-year-old Brit. She has 2 kids. She's working a dead-end job. She's thinking about her time in college at Kentucky College, which I saw on a sweatshirt they were wearing. This is definitely, the ending, guys, right? Like, that's Exhibit A, because we all know there's absolutely no world in which those 2 girls with no prior, unless they were, Black Ops members or, Navy SEALs, they were not going to kill 10 bodyguards just running and gunning like that. That should have been our first indication. So what really was on display here was a post-feminist response and kind of megaphoning the post-feminist idea and conception to a larger audience through visceral imagery, through akin to how Nicki Minaj might be perceived, accepted as kind of an ambassador, a champion of feminist ideals. So
Nicki Minaj, by the way, plays during the heist of the Chicken Shack early.
Yes.
Right.
So here's why the movie's so great, right? I like movies that have a coherent message, but that also allow you to be lost in the movie while it's happening, so they neither sacrifice the visceral experience for the message or vice versa. This movie allows both to happen. You're really not confronted with the idea. I guess for me, going into this movie, I was like, okay, well, this is obviously going to backfire on them. They're going to probably end up in the back alley getting raped or something at the end, and it's going to be horrible, and we're going to learn about the dangers of teenage frivolity, or I don't know, that was the idea, that I thought that's how they were going to subvert it. But they went the complete opposite way, which basically was saying, we're going to use these assets at our disposal to actually succeed, to triumph in the end, right? To play alien, to get him to commit to a heist that he was reluctant to do, to kind of emasculate him to the point where he felt he had to engage in the heist. So you see the characters splitting off throughout the movie as kind of the shedding of prior notions of femininity, right? You see Faith, and obviously Faith, that's pretty on the nose, but her kind of rigidity, her moral rigidity, right, and her scrupulosity, excuse me, she's shed, right? And then Cody, who is in that one party scene, she's unwilling to give herself to that one guy, that's very euphemistic what I'm saying, but she's shot in the arm, she's gone. So what we're left is with two girls who do not care, who have no scruples about fucking for motive, are not afraid of violence, are ultra violent, and are not afraid of manipulation to advance their aims. And I think that is a powerful message, because at the end, we are meant to kind of see the ridiculousness of the situation and wonder why so many movies force women who break all these implicit rules into situations that are obviously doomed to fail and play out in these traditional morality plays. So this really, for me, was kind of mold shattering in that way. And I think there's a lot of problems with this movie. I think it's poorly written, for instance, but I'm willing to forgive those things, I guess, in a role reversal where you guys were in other situations. I think, like, at the beginning, some of this stuff is so hack, like Faith's just, and Selena Gomez didn't really help the cause. She's not a great actress. Like, she's really not that good. She's like, but where are we gonna get the money, guys? And it's just kind of like, oh boy, is this how it's gonna go? But I really do think Ashley Benson and Vanessa Hudgens, pretty solid actors, and they played the kind of the nymph-like influence so perfectly, and we're just surrounded by, and for me, I was intoxicated throughout the movie. And maybe it's nostalgia, maybe I'm just I hit that part of my brain from, like, listening to Cruella and, like, doing Nitrous Oxide in 2012. It just made sense to me. Maybe that's it, and it says for a niche audience, but I thought there was a bigger message here, and it was quite interesting to find it here. Anyways, I'd like to hear what you guys have to think about the ending, or Tony can describe what he thinks about the movie too. Sorry for rambling.
No, I'm glad. I'll say, first of all, some disclosure here for why I picked Kirk last. I received a phone call from Kirk the other day where he told me that he loved Spring Breakers, and that was it. So I knew I had the ace in the hole at least. I had 1 hour.
That was amazing. I did not see that one coming.
I know. I was going to say, like, in watching it again tonight, I was thinking, like, that is the most shock. Like, I thought, like, if there was any movie I picked that I'm like, Kirk's going to hate, I thought this was for sure. Like, there were so many things in this movie that I'm like, oh, Kirk would hate that. Oh, Kirk would hate that. Oh, that's such a Kirk. Because I'm just thinking about other episodes and other movies we've done, and I'm just like, things like that he, I mean, we don't have to get into every little thing, but I'm pleasantly surprised, though, that he got so much out of it and that he enjoyed it so much. And it's interesting too, your reading, as you say, like a post-feminist text, because I definitely a lot of that in here, definitely a lot of stuff about gender roles, and particularly, like, of course, the scene where they, like, Alien is filleting their silenced pistols, which is an amazing sequence. I love that scene. It just very, like, a lot of college papers ready to be written about that. Mm-hmm. But, like, anyway, but it's interesting because that's not my primary, like, reading of the movie. I want to say first, like, I think Connor's points were well taken. They were well said. I definitely think that, like, I definitely get how you could watch this movie and feel as though it's just a music video. It's all surface. It's all aesthetic. But I really do think there is more going on. I think this movie has kind of endless ways to be interpreted, which maybe that's kind of, there's endless ways, then there's no ways, right? Then it's saying nothing. But I don't know. I think this movie's got a lot going on, a lot on its mind. I think Harmony Korine is a very intuitive filmmaker. I don't think he sits down and thinks about like, I have to draw out all these themes and all these messages and I have to make this kind of social commentary. I don't think that's really how he works. I think he's a lot more like, he goes for the feeling, he goes for the vibe, he goes for the tone, and he lets that kind of take him where it leads him. But I do think that's like, a perfectly valid way to work. And I think there's a lot in this movie that I like really think is like fascinating. There's so many angles you can take it. I mean, the race angle too is very rich, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. But I think first and foremost, and you guys all kind of alluded to it, I think the visuals in this movie are amazing. I think this is one of the best looking movies I've ever seen, full stop. I think this movie is absolutely gorgeous. Benoit Debie's cinematography is top 10 best ever seen in a movie. The way the colors pop in this movie and the lighting in every single scene, absolutely gorgeous, absolutely stunning, absolutely jaw-dropping. Every scene looks amazing. Like Kirk said, like this movie is intoxicating. And I think one of the things that's so kind of impressive about this movie is the way, like, think about the opening sequence. Think about the way this movie starts. You got the Skrillex song coming on, and you see this kind of montage of people partying on a beach. And it rides this amazing line between kind of the ironic distance and like, look at these dumb kids, which I think is like one way you could have made this movie and it would have been a much dumber and shittier movie. And that's in there a little bit. But there's also sort of like, that never felt quite right to me when people said that. To me, there's something kind of earnest about it, kind of earnest, and just like, there is some, like, in that opening montage, as you see topless women having like beer poured on them, as you see guys with beer bongs and like, doing drugs and all these images that we might find repulsive, as enlightened NYU graduates, there is something very beautiful about it. There is something very beautiful about those images, very Terrence Malick, very like, oh my God, like there's a reverence to it. And just like, I get into the song, and there's so many scenes like that in this movie where I'm like, wow, like that is gorgeous. And just like, I talked a little bit in the Inception episode about the way Nolan can create these kind of iconic images, which I think is a very like underrated skill for a director, is to be able to create something iconic. What does it mean to make something iconic? But it's like Potter Stewart said about porn. I know it when I see it. This movie is full of just absolutely iconic moments. Just everything with James Franco, the look at my shit scene, the like filleting the guns, like I mentioned, them with the DTF sweatpants, staring into the sunset, holding assault rifles. There are so many like absolutely indelible, absolutely extraordinary images throughout this movie. And that's what you notice on the first glance. But the reason I say there's more to it, and the reason I think what's so brilliant about it, is that this is a movie about images. This is a movie about the power of images and what images do and what images mean. I mean, that's what makes it so beautifully cinematic. I think, to me, this movie's about, I'll tell a quick anecdote to illustrate a point I'm making and my kind of emotional connection to the movie, because I didn't have Kirk's experience. I didn't have that quite. I never went to parties. I never went to spring break, really. I didn't have these experiences like they depict in the movie. But my emotional into this movie is a memory from when I was very young, when I was like 8 years old, and I loved Star Wars. As a little kid, I loved Star Wars. And I remember seeing Star Wars and loving Star Wars and seeing how amazing and how epic and how cool Star Wars was and how boring my own life seemed in comparison. And I would pray at night to be whisked away by an Obi-Wan Kenobi figure onto some epic quest, onto some adventure. And then after 9/11 happened, I thought, maybe I don't want that. As odd as that sounds, like that was kind of my wake-up call, like, oh, maybe there's real violence and scary things in the world. Maybe my boring life is actually okay. Maybe that's fine. And I think this movie is kind of about that. It's kind of about that idea of like kind of this being this like person who's kind of a privileged, ensconced person in this bubble. And the idea of like watching rap videos and, watching music videos and hearing music and like getting into art, getting into these images and this iconography of like, adventure and hedonism and rebellion and finding it very alluring and wanting something, that idea of that yearning for something beyond your life, which I think is like a very kind of universal thing. And then like the tension between the images themselves and the idea of like a badass man with a gun shooting people he doesn't like, and then the lived reality of what that would actually be like. What would it be like to be that guy in real life? It probably wouldn't be that fun. And this is underscored with the alien character when he's in the amazing "look at my shit" sequence where he says Scarface on repeat 24/7, which is such a clever thing because Scarface is the classic example of that, where all these dudes like love Scarface and idolize Scarface as though they haven't actually seen the movie, which is about how you don't want to be a drug kingpin. It's bad to be a drug kingpin. And yet many, many people think it's so cool and badass to be a drug kingpin because of Scarface. So I think this movie is about that tension and about that allure of those images and wanting to become an image. And I think that's the quest, that's the arc of these characters. These are not three-dimensional, well-realized characters. The writing is not super sophisticated, but these are about people trying to become one-dimensional, people trying to become images. It's like when Vanessa Hudgens said, Selena Gomez rather says, in like one of the early pool scenes, she says, "I wish we could just freeze this moment in time." Freeze the moment in time is in become a still image. That's what they want. And that's why they keep chasing these moments. That's why they go out in the compound with guns and why they ride in the Lamborghini at the end of the movie and just stage these like badass and epic and cool moments. And that's what the movie, I think, is about. And the other thing, and I'm sure I'm leaving things on the table here, but the other angle too, I think, about this movie that's really kind of sharp and incisive is like the element of racial commentary, because the first thing in the movie after that Skrillex montage is them in class and we see Emmett Till on the PowerPoint, right? And they're not listening. They're like laughing and joking with each other and talking about spring break in this very irreverent way, in a way that a lot of people would probably find offensive, right? And the movie ends with them just gunning down black people. You hear the voiceover and you hear the music and the orchestral score is so sweet, and you return to those beautiful images of the partying, and then you see these dead guys. You see a dead guy floating in a pool. You see a guy bleeding out on the grass. So, I mean, and I've just scratched the surface. I think there's just so much texture to this movie. There's so many amazing details. I love the twins. I love everything James Franco does. I think this movie is so full of life and so full of verb, and it's so exciting and dangerous and weird. And I can't believe that it got made and was released to a wide audience. It honestly stuns me. And I think that, like, I don't know, I have a gratitude for this movie and in awe of this movie. And it's, I don't know, to call it a music video, while I understand how someone could have that, I feel like there's so much that's kind of being left out of the discussion when we talk about that. Although that is important because that is part of it. It is partly, a music video. So did those elements kind of register for you guys? Did you think they were handled poorly, or it was kind of incoherent, or was it more, or did it kind of just get lost in this kind of swirl of imagery? I'll start with Anthony. Like, what was your take on like the racial commentary or like the social commentary in this movie? Do you think it works? Do you think it works like as a satire, or does that just kind of fall flat for you?
I think there's a way of reading it where it works in that sense. I think, though, hearing your take and hearing Kirk's take has made me kind of come to grips with my own problem with the movie, and that's definitely part of it, which is the way you described it as a movie about images and wanting to become the image, and only realizing that's sort of unable to be sort of achieved in a sense, right? Like, you can't freeze the moment. And Kirk is talking about the movie as sort of establishing its own sense of post-feminine morality. I think in a way, though, the way I see it is it's about the absence of a sort of image. It's about the problem of images themselves as actually having no meaning. And it's about actually moral characters, moral in their own terms, at least, not in the positivistic sense, but about moral characters who are realizing that they're in a sort of amoral world, in a world where your escape, and its hedonistic escape, actually only undermines your own sense of anticipation. I think what I'm getting at is the journey of the characters, and as you said, it's unfair to call them characters, are only purveyors into the sense of a culture in which the only gratitude is irony, violence, all built upon a sort of racialized structure. The sort of thing that you want, these sort of iconic images that are images themselves that are built on minority kind of people, right? The Scarface itself, of course, Al Pacino is not it, but it's built on a Cuban. The kind of ideas of the gangster life built on kind of Black alternative lifestyles to capitalism, which is about becoming the most hedonistic, decadent person you could be, embracing the sort of, very thing you're not supposed to be a part of. And I think in that sense, what I see is kind of Harmony Korine with a sly little grin as he's filming every shot. And by the time I come to the visuals, I'm actually very annoyed. And I think it's because I tend to want a bit more sincerity and a little less irony and a more honest embrace of what these people could come to accept in their own lives. I don't know if that made sense.
So are this kind of similar to like the David Foster Wallace critique of like Bret Easton Ellis or like American Psycho? Like it's kind of so ironic and so kind of high on its own supply that it loses touch with kind of any moral content of its own.
Well, I disagree with that first, but that's a different reason for the American Psycho. But I guess it's a similar approach.
What about you, Connor? Did those elements register for you? Did you kind of find yourself agreeing more with Anthony, or were you just so kind of bored by it that these discussions almost feel moot?
I guess the latter. Although I would say, I detected, I picked up on all these things you mentioned, especially the second watch around, the detail of, talking about reconstruction in the class. And so I think you'd mentioned me a long time ago. It did to kind of open my eyes, right? The sequence when our first moment where Faith seems to have doubts, right, is when they go to like a party at like a pool hall where it's mostly black people, for the first time, whereas before it'd been mostly white people, right, at these spring break parties. And suddenly she has a change of conscience or whatever, change of heart, or, doesn't want to be, she can't handle it anymore or something like that, right? So clearly there's definitely a racial, commentary there. There's commentary on the way in which this is like this world of these college students is this closed off, and itself maybe ultimately purely hedonistic or, but again, it's like, okay, so they're trying to escape from the world of college, right, into pure hedonism. Or is it saying that they already are pursuing a kind of a hedonistic life to begin with? There's also this idea of like, well, the conformity, right, of being in that college lecture hall. Everyone is watching the same computer screen, right? The pink light, for instance, of the slide is reflected on all their faces equally. So they become as if, they're made to conform, so to speak. But okay, so they don't seem to really escape from conformity in the context of spring break, where they conform. And in some ways, I think part of the point or part of the appeal is a kind of ego death and even like a lack of like bodily divisions anymore. Everyone is kind of forming together into one big mass. So it's like, I just find these ideas are a little bit confused to me, or like I find there's a little clarity in these ideas, though I like where you're going, Tony. And I agree. Like, one thing that I find, I think just personally off-putting that I find it hard to overcome is the characterization of our four girls, especially Vanessa Hudgens and the other one who's kind of our last remaining, Ashley
Benson,
and how, yes, they're self-consciously, they're nymph-like, and they're sort of constantly dancing around and frolicking. There's this kind of three graces, kind of, they're always linking arms and kind of weaving in and out of each other, and they speak in this kind of affected way. And, obviously there's something kind of off-putting, maybe just kind of grating on an individual level. You want them to be more like real people, right? Obviously they're consciously not being like real people, but where does that come from? And is it purely from the other? Are they always imagining a man looking at them? Seemingly not, right? Because they do all these things on their own, and I mean, clearly this comes across very well in the scene that you mentioned, which is my favorite scene, which is the whole, the gun filleting scene, which I think is obviously, it's very on the nose, but it works, right? It's a compelling scene. To me, there's the confusion of ideas, and maybe it's just my lack of ability to grasp the movie on a more visceral level that impedes my ability to put these things all together. But yeah.
Okay, no, I understand, and I do think there is some confusion. I don't know if every element. I think as a byproduct of Korine's kind of approach, where I think he goes through the vibe first, the tone first. Like, I think he knows, like, I think the way he approaches a scene is like, this would be a really cool scene. Like, I think the gun filleting scene, he's like, oh wow, that would be such a cool, like, provocative scene.
And I'd say for the most part, it's not even the scenes, though that is a good example of a scene. It's just the images.
Right. Okay. Sure.
I want to see them dancing on the beach with a piano, and then he has to kind of concoct this way of getting them into that situation. Creates this kind of a natural scene. But anyway, sorry.
I think he may have started with like a storyboard. I have no way of knowing this. I haven't watched a lot of interviews or anything from him, and he's not very forthcoming about his process a lot of the time anyway. But I suspect he may have even started with like a storyboard, where he thought, I want to have these four girls doing this in this way. And then he kind of built the story. He kind of reverse engineered a plot, right? And I think that by virtue of that approach, you're going to have like kind of these awkward, maybe things that don't quite connect. Like there are things in this movie that I sort of don't get why they're there, or like what role they play, or like why is it just that Faith is the one with this kind of racial anxiety? Why do the other two or three not seem to really like, where does that fit in? Why is that making a commentary about religion? I'm not really sure. Where's the religion part? Things like that, right? But I'm willing to forgive that because I think it fits into this like kind of greater tapestry of feeling and of movement and color that I just get swept up in. And I almost don't worry about those things as much. But Kirk, I want to ask you a follow-up. You talked early on, your first point was about your kind of personal connection to the movie and your kind of your past. And I was wondering, how does that personal kind of relating to the movie, I guess, how does that interact with your kind of take on the commentary or like the satire? Are you kind of like on their side the whole time in this kind of uncomplicated way? Or does it become more complicated as it goes along? Or is it not even a matter of like passing moral judgment? Because I think a lot of the times when we talk about movies, you come from this place of a very strong moral sense, right? Of wanting to know kind of where we stand in relation to the characters and kind of what the movie is saying about the characters. And I know that's kind of a priority for you. So does that kind of like fall away when you watch this movie? Or how do you reckon with kind of your experience of these parties and the movie's depiction of them? Or does that make sense? Is that a coherent question? Yeah. Okay.
No, I mean, that's fair. Well, I just wanted to definitely concur with Anthony. I think any sort of racial commentary, critical race commentary in this movie is muddied and poorly formulated at best. And I think it's indicative of the separation between, feminist ideas, the lack of intersectionality, right? That we all know, the global sisterhood, the irony of that, right? And I would have mentioned that in my opening, but I think I was just swept away a little by the viscerality, the way this movie plays with, like I said, my mirror neurons, like they just fire. And I think, there's something to be said for the time this was made. We lived in at least in Minnesota, it was homogenous is like an understatement. Like, and there was no room, no intellectual storage space given to cogitating upon race and gender. And so, I think the thing I related to the most in the motives, in the images, in the actions of the characters is this need to escape any sort of existential reckoning, to escape, to be born into a culture of violence, right? Like they're using the gun symbols throughout the movie, the first, memories of Columbine, right? And then I was thinking, oh shit, I have to go to high school in 4 years. What's that going to be like, right? Like, and I know everybody basically that was born after 1990 has felt that as well. And increasingly living in a godless society, right? Like there's something there, this confluence that creates, MTV, TRL, all these things, and then losing that, and then everything disintegrating, kind of coalescing into this amorphous blob that we can kind of glom onto as teens and preteens, and then the disintegration and decentralization towards YouTube and Facebook and Spotify and Netflix. And the culture has no clear kind of direction. And by culture, that it's unfortunate, but the culture usually is the white culture, the prescribed white heteronormative culture. But that's what we're addressing here. But so for me, I think the existential dread, the feeling of moral indolence, this was a pre-activist time. This was before people were taking to the streets and actually voicing their concerns. We were much more complacent. And I think that release there's something about it that's somewhat spiritual. Is there's a reverence to it. I think it's similar to like, I think about like Reagan years, like those two things. Like when we watch the 80s, we think, oh yeah, that's very cliche, right? The leggings and dancing to Poison or whatever. So to me, that's like, there's a similar time where like the late 2000s or late aughts, early 10s had this kind of absence, this lack of moral character or fabric, I guess is the word to describe, that guided our society. And I guess I'm complicit in that. That was intoxicating for me. Yeah, as a white man, that probably was intoxicating for me. I was more concerned about girls and getting drunk and my own selfish means. But so I was definitely part of it. But I think looking back on it, and for the snippet of this movie, I can really just kind of appreciate, yeah, that was, I can feel that constant running towards the sun, right? Like, and constantly feeling like we're missing it. And the party's about to end, but it doesn't really matter in that moment. And so, if you ever done nitrous oxide, it's the best 12 seconds of your life. And then comes the down, the downside. And so it's about those 12 seconds, and it's about that image, and it's about what Selena Gomez said, like freezing this moment. What she's intimating there is that she knows that life is going to go downhill from here, and she doesn't want to face that. And so there's this kind of collective cowardice that we all subscribe to. And I think that in and of itself is intoxicating. And of course, the chemical, on a neurochemical level, having sex, getting drunk, doing shitloads of drugs, like that's fun, right? Like that's objectively fun, like from a neurochemical perspective, which you have to acknowledge. So anyways, go ahead.
There are a lot of great points there. I think that there is definitely, a sense of desperation to the partying in this movie, a sense of urgency, a sense of like, we need to like, you know what I mean? Like when you see someone binging on whatever, there's a sense of like, I need all this right now. I need to do this right now. And just like kind of that is the feeling of these like this extreme hedonism. And I think it speaks to that yearning. I think part of being in college is the idea that like, this is the last time we can do this. This is the last time we can live like this. We're going to have these boring jobs and boring lives. And like, we need to get out all of this like animal energy right now. Right. And I think that's what speaks to this like extreme, just the extremes of the hedonism we see in this movie, and in real life, of course, too. I mean, it's based on, real behavior. People do things like this. And then also, too, I think culturally, and I think I want to pivot now into that discussion of like what was happening in like the early 2010s. Like, what is this cultural moment this movie captures or maybe speaks to? And I think maybe, and we talked about this in Bitter Lake about the idea of narratives or stories or like cultural narratives. And I think that in that time, in that kind of second term of Obama era, there is that sense of this narrative kind of falling apart, the sense that we no longer have a shared cultural narrative. And maybe this like nostalgic, romantic yearning to return to a shared culture, a shared narrative, a shared experience. And I think that to these characters, Spring Break is that idea, that it is this thing we can all come together and enjoy. We can all just have together. Like there is no divisions in that place, right? And obviously, they're mostly like white people, but to them, they don't think that way. They haven't been made aware of that, So they are blinded, they are blinkered, but I think that's part of what's going on. So I'll open the discussion up. So what do you guys think was going on at this moment in history that made Spring Breakers emerge? And why, Anthony, do you think that this movie could not be made today, at least not in the way that it eventually did come out?
Well, one interesting thing about the movie, I actually give the movie a bit of credit for this, is we all brought up this line, I think, in various ways. The Selena Gomez, we wish we could freeze this moment. Let's really think about that, because all the other dialogue in the film is really sort of secondary to the visual happenings that are going on. But that one moment pretty much encapsulates like social media culture. To also think about it in the sense of 2013, right, for the film? Facebook is still at a height, and that's still going on. It's still really popular, right? The idea of sharing what you're doing on Facebook, the whole fear of missing out culture FOMO is actually still in the discussion. It's not passe anymore. It's no longer the like, I want to be home, which will come, a couple years, before where we are now. But also Instagram is 2 years into its run. It's quickly becoming the most popular social media app. Snapchat has debuted about a year or two into its run. At the moment, Vine is still really popular. Twitter is now like finally coming into a sort of big sense of kind of cultural dominance. So we have all these kind of different ideas running, and what we're left with ultimately is just the image of likability. That's something I want to do, particularly at this cultural time. And I could go back and re-look at it as if it's never disappeared. I go back and see, and what am I doing? I'm just repeating things. And it's become the movie's sort of strategy of how it deploys its narrative, which is just sheer repetition of the thing that we thought we wanted to do, but actually in itself is not even encapsulating what's really happening. And in itself, that has kind of a very sad melancholy to it that I think we feel in the movie. That's a kind of a credit to the movie's technique, but also how much enjoyment are we ourselves getting from it? At least how much enjoyment am I getting from it as someone who already is kind of distrusting and distasteful of that sort of mode of thinking?
Yeah, I'll see too, Anthony, I think you really pointed out something important, and I hadn't made the connection until you made it explicit, but that idea of wanting to become an image, I think that's a big part of like Instagram culture, like social media culture. Just speaking anecdotally from like people I know and like how they act, like I think that social media has changed how we act in different situations, like at a restaurant or traveling or whatever. I know people who will like order certain food at a restaurant or go to a certain place, not because that's something they would want or because they think that will be the best experience in that moment, but because it would look really good on Instagram. Like that is a real thing. That's a real incentive that social media has created. And while this movie does not like talk about social media in any explicit way, I think it's pretty brilliant the way it like articulates that feeling, that idea, that desire, because why should we want that? Why would that be so important? But it undeniably is for a lot of people. And I think that is a big part of like why it emerged when it did, or like what is animating some of this stuff. Well, I'm moving on for a little bit. I think we're going to pivot into the voting now. So I have a pretty clear idea where this is going, but let's start with Anthony. Let's just do the order we did at the beginning. So I'll have Anthony go.
All right. I don't know how smart of a choice it was to have me go first, because I think so. I'm kind of on a fence in the sense of Kirk and Tony made some good points. They definitely have made me see ideas in the movie that I'm still a bit resistant to, but I'm willing to give credit of, particularly the idea of, the social media aspect and kind of also like the idea of the image, which I wasn't thinking about beforehand. I think on the other hand, the other way I want to pull back though, is to really think about the movie's cultural relevance though today. And to think, is it really like relevant at all? Like, do you actually see discussions of spring break even happening like on the internet, like Tony? Or is it just like your Reddit page?
The movie Spring Breakers or Spring Break?
Yeah, Spring Breakers, sorry.
Well, spring break is pretty much over.
Yeah, that's for unrelated reasons. That's not the movie's fault.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I see discussions. That's the thing is I don't know. I don't know how many discussions I see of this movie. I mean, I don't know. It feels relevant. I mean, I think these things are. I think like you guys talk as though this movie has gotten completely passe and there's like a million other things like this now. I really don't think that's true. I think it still has some like packs a punch. I think it's still like I can't think of a lot of there are a few other movies that have kind of co-opted this aesthetic a little bit, but not a lot. I don't know. So I don't know how quote unquote relevant it is, but I think the ideas in it are certainly relevant.
All right. I think here's the thing. I think watching this movie is kind of like scrolling through a bunch of Instagram posts of people I don't really care about on the Explorer page, or seeing a bunch of GIFs on Tumblr, particularly of James Franco, that I just don't care about anymore. I'm going to say soft no, though. Soft no.
All right.
I was close. If I got second or third, I might have said yes.
All right. I was going to do Kirk, then Connor, but I'll do Kirk. Okay, fine. I'll do Kirk
then. Oh, man. Well, I have a feeling I'm Alaska reporting my electoral votes, but I'll give it a yes. I think, yeah, there's really not much more to be said. It's ultimately what kind of a movie, what I look for in a movie is something that allows me to enjoy a visceral experience, but also see something larger than the movie, have something that I'm allowed to take with me, right? And I think there are movies that do one or the other. And like, if I had to choose, it would depend on the day. But I really think that the visceral, kind of mixed with the rational and the logical or the critical. For me, at the end, and we didn't really talk about the ending, like, I feel like a lot of the reason this movie got so much shit is because people tried to, like, took the ending as literal, but it's obviously figurative. And so when we're presented with an instance where it's explicitly figurative, it allows my brain to kind of go. And so that's what's exciting for me. And in the other instances, I just feel like I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to the director. And I'm sure I've done plenty of that this episode. But like, when the clarion call by the director is to interpret this in a interesting way, I get intrigued. And so, yeah, anyways, it's a yes. So,
all right, bring us home, Connor.
All right, this is hard. This is hard because you guys have convinced me, or you guys have, persuaded me certainly away from my original, rather negative take. I think there's still definitely problems with it. I think there's definitely still, I have to stick by my critique that, like, it floats a little bit too much between, being kind of, again, a music video is perhaps too pejorative, but being just a series of images and having real plot, right? I still think the James Franco character is kind of weird, but I'm going to give it a yes.
All right. Yes. Thanks.
I think there's strong things to be said, just the incredible direction. I think, yeah, Tony's right. I guess there's nothing that's quite like it. I think you've been co-opted in some ways. And I think in general, it's the aesthetic, which was very shocking, I think, and very interesting at the time, has been, done a little bit since then. But I think it's still, it's really kind of one of a kind in its way, or it's an originator at least. So, and I think you guys have pointed out a lot of the sort of critical or analytical points we could put on it. So, yeah.
All right. We've talked a lot about Spring Breakers. Let's move on to our next segment. Glad it got in. Why don't you guys suggest me a movie to watch next week? Now, do you guys know who went least recently? I do not know off the top of my head.
Kirk, yeah.
Connor, you can go first. I'll go last.
I'm going to recommend a movie that may be a little bit selfish. This semester, I've been learning a language. The language is called Portuguese. I only know really one film that's in Portuguese, and Tony knows it too. I think it's time I test my skills by revisiting this film. I'm talking, of course, the Brazilian classic film, Cidade de Deus, City of God. It's about a favela, right, and sort of several decades in the sort of life of these characters in this favela.
Isn't favela like a map in Call of Duty? Like,
that's actually what
Call of Duty came
first.
It's true. Yeah, it was inspired by the level from the Call of Duty 2 campaign, Modern Warfare 2.
So last time I picked a movie, we were in the 40s. We jumped into 2013, and I think I'm going to stick in the recent past. And I think I'm going to stick on these themes of decadence and hedonism by suggesting a movie from 2012. It's a movie based on a book, and I'm picking it because Kirk always says I think the books are always better, but this is a movie that I think actually improves on the book. It's 2012's Cosmopolis by David Cronenberg. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it basically takes place. It stars Robert Pattinson in a slew, kind of all-star cast, Juliette Binoche and Paul Giamatti, on, and kind of all mainly takes place in sort of this one percenter's limo as he kind of is navigating New York in a time of possibly sort of Occupy Wall Street, at its most logical extent, its end, is happening around, and all sorts of things are going on. So it's a very interesting sort of movie. I can't promise that any of us are going to like it, but it's a very interesting,
I've seen it and I do like it.
Oh, okay. Well, okay.
Anthony's got a bowl of lima beans for us, guys. All right, Kirk, what do you got?
Wait, is that a line from the movie?
No, I haven't seen the movie.
Ball of lima beans?
A bowl of lima. I meant like he was saying like eat your vegetables, right?
Oh,
I can't promise we'll all like it, but it'll be interesting. So
No, I'm not saying it like that. I'm saying it's like a movie that like
lima beans, famously divisive.
Oh, let's see. You know who we haven't done yet? Darren Aronofsky.
True.
Quite a a brilliant kind of craftful.
for that,
Crafty.
He's a craftsman.
He is a craftsman. Yeah, crafty, full of tricks, craftful. Anyways, I bet you guys are all thinking in your head, you're like, what? Which Aronofsky is it?
I wonder which one should it be.
Noah or bust. Noah or bust, Kirk.
Oh, did he do Noah?
He did. I really like Noah. I thought about pitching that before. Anyway, go ahead.
I am going to pick a movie that I'm quite fond of. Captures a certain essence, they're very strong motifs throughout the movie, and that is The Wrestler. I think this movie is grossly forgotten, and much like the main character, we could talk about Mickey Rourke's career and how he kind of had this fall from grace. And there's a lot of him in this movie, and so it's really a character study, right? And it's quite naturalistic. I think we've kind of fallen away from that a little bit, and it might be time to dive back in. And I don't know. There's some grand implications for generational shifts throughout this movie, right? A man of the '80s. Kind of coming into the 2000s with no real aim or purpose, and having seen his best days go by the wayside. So it's almost like a natural sequel to Spring Breakers. Anyways.
Okay, wow. I'll say first, we've got, just to let you know where the lay of the land, so you know what you guys have to do.
Mm-hmm.
We've got two of my personal favorites up against a movie about a limo. So, Anthony, I want you to bring the heat. I want you to bring the fire right now. I want you to tell me why I'm a fool and why I need to pick your movie. So let's start with Anthony for the rebuttals.
All right. Well, first, let's not forget that Kirk is the guy who's trashed on Marissa Tomei numerous times in the past.
Yeah.
Only to now nominate the wrestler. Come on. We don't need any more Marissa Tomei slander on this podcast.
No.
Dude, come on, City of God. Didn't we all watch this in the dorm together?
Probably.
I think I saw it with you guys, or maybe it was recommended after you guys.
Have you seen City of God?
Yeah, I'm fairly certain I've seen it, but I'm mixing it up with another movie right now.
Okay, well, let me just say it's an interesting movie. I'm sure we'd all be into it. I'm sure Connor's Portuguese is going to elucidate something we would never have known about the movie otherwise. But let's say Cosmopolis is interesting. It's fantastic. It's David Cronenberg, so of course it's going to be technically interesting. But I mean, I think the social ideas are handled in a very particular way. I think if you have any sort of interest in kind of populism versus, the sort of elite Wall Street kind of ideas that are floating around, the movie's only more prescient than ever. So I'll just drop it there.
I gotta say, it's a Cronenberg film. Does Robert Pattinson turn into some kind of giant slug at any point in the movie?
No. But it is
no comment.
No comment. But it's also based on a Don DeLeo book. I'll just throw that out there.
That's a plus, sure. All right. Why don't we go Connor?
Well, I know I'm sitting on a golden egg here. I don't have to make too much of a case for City of God. Of course, it's like an epic. It has so many aspects to it. It's just, it has humor and so much style, and there's a lot of case to be made. But I have to say, looking back on it, I wonder if it will mine so much meaning from it as a very meaningful film. I hope so. I really have nothing bad to say about either of my two co-host suggestions. I think The Wrestler is really cool. Marissa Tomei is really good in it. It's true. And Cosmopolis, I would also strongly recommend. I think it's really worth a watch. I can afford to be generous because I know it has City of God. The only thing I would say about it is a kind of a meta comment, which is that it may put a sort of chilling effect on our desire to recommend another Cronenberg movie, which I think Cronenberg should be one of our guys. We should have multiple, hopefully have multiple chances for Cronenberg to get in. But I want it sooner rather than later. So I almost don't want to even see the spot to Cosmopolis. But I would say it's also, a very good one of his.
Very gentlemanly.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, yeah, sounds like City of God might be in the cards, but, that's okay.
This weird reverse psychology he always...
I'll go on. I enjoyed the movie. It's quite good. Might be something worth watching, but again, I do remember seeing it. But yeah, Cosmopolis sounds like 13 going on 30 or something. I don't really want to watch it. Just kidding. Yeah, I don't really have anything bad to say. I'm sure both movies, I've obviously seen one, but the other one I could either love or hate, and that's always entertaining. I think in my case, this is Marissa Tomei's redemption arc. This is where
After Before the Devil Knows You're Dead.
One more question. So we've all seen The Wrestler and City of God. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, he's gonna pick Cosmo.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? It's funny. It's funny from how we've been talking. Everyone's assuming I'm gonna pick City of God because I do really love that movie. I haven't seen it in a while, but the fact that we've all seen it but I was really feeling The Wrestler. Like I love The Wrestler, and I'm like, ooh, I'd like to watch The Wrestler. That's a great movie. I'm like, oh, that hits me in my gut. But I don't know. To me, like it's more interesting to get the raw reactions. So I'm gonna go with Cosmopolis. But they were all very strong choices. They were all very, very good.
Well.
No. I was actually that's a really hard choice. They were all really good, and I didn't
think you'd be able to resist, but.
No, I would. This is like when Anthony pitched Cloud Atlas, and I still kick myself sometimes. I think, should I pick Cloud Atlas? I don't know.
No, but I'm glad. Cosmopolis is really cool. I would love to watch it again.
No, I would like to do both of those movies at some point. So,
I feel like I had the second, batter at, just helping out with Connor right there. Connor did a better job doing it than I did.
You shouldn't have been so gentlemanly, Connor. You should have lied about it.
Maybe I shouldn't have been. But then I'm also worried if I'm going to understand a single word of it in Portuguese. Portuguese is pretty bad.
I also love Robert Pattinson. He's become one of my favorite guys. So that's also a nice point.
This was like one of the first, Robert Pattinson. I don't know.
Yeah.
Wow, he's cool. I like it. Yeah.
It was the first, one of his early, arty.
I'm actually going to watch Cosmopolis with a Portuguese dub. So
okay, good idea. Let's all do it.
Take us away, Anthony.
I'll have what she's having.